First of all, I don't normally get a clap at I don't get a clap at the end, not normally at the beginning, so hopefully I can tell you a few things today that might be of some use. Just like James, I'd just like to start by thanking Ange and yourselves for coming giving up your Saturday morning to listen to some bloke from Wigan, and hopefully I can maybe try and fill some of the gaps when it comes to protein. In terms of myself, you heard this morning, I started my interest in sport when I was trying to make it as a professional rugby league player back in the mid-90s, and due to a distinct lack of talent I had to find a new career, and this new career has taken me to what a lot of you've seen from James this morning. I'm the culprit who has to take all the biopsies in our department, and what we try and do, as James says, is try and work out what's going on in the muscle and how food affects this, and then we can try and give better advice to our athletes. And I think what makes our group a little bit unique is that not only do we biopsy our students, so if you come to our place you will leave with a little bit less muscle than you came with, but we also try and do it with the very best athletes. And you'll see on that picture there, we're trying to take muscle, well, we were taking muscle biopsies from professional rugby players prior to a game and after the game, and you can see that the needle at that point is in the player's leg. And he's still probably on Pokemon Go, knowing kids these days, but he's still on his mobile phone, so it isn't as traumatic as what you might think. And that's given us some real insights into how we can feed people that a little bit better. And then, as I said, my key challenge then is to try and translate this all the way into food-centred advice. And you heard James mention a key phrase that you'll hear me, certainly in the next talk, and I'll use a lot here, about a food-first approach. And that is very much the way, even at the very senior end, we try to do our nutrition. We get the diet right, the food right, we get that sorted first, and then where necessary we will put some supplementation on top. But if we don't need to, we don't. And I guess that's the first take-home message that I'd like people to take from today, is that the supplements aren't essential. There are certainly some players within the England senior team who don't take a single one, despite what you may read. So, sometimes we do. But the key to the word is that word supplement. It's not a substitute, and it's to supplement the diet rather than substitute an inadequate diet. And if somebody won't engage with me getting the diet right first, then for me it's just a shortcut that I'm not willing to take. But that'll come more in the second talk. And then the teams that I tend to focus my work on at the moment is England Rugby. I couldn't talk to you guys without mentioning Zoe Gillings, and it's great to see her mum in the audience today. I've really enjoyed my time working with the British ski and snowboard team. I do a lot of work with professional golfers, and with the Ryder Cup next week, there's 2 or 3 of the guys I work with competing in that. And then a really interesting sport that I've spent the last 5 years working in is professional jockeys. And maybe that's a talk for another day. If you want to learn how to make weight, these guys are a brilliant group to work with. But what I'm here today to talk about is protein. And I think a lot of the confusion with protein comes from the supplement industry, and they've maybe really tried to overcomplicate what's quite a simple story. And hopefully you guys will leave today knowing the fundamentals and how simple it actually is to get your protein intake right. And I guess a lot of athletes still don't get it right, maybe because they are confused from a very overcomplicated story. And I guess the story must start here, which is how much. So we're here at RDA, the recommended daily amount. What is the recommended daily amount of protein? Now, when I was at university, I was told that as an athlete we only needed the same as the general public. And the RDA for the general public is about 0.8 grams per kilogram body mass. Given I'm from Wigan and maths isn't my strong point, let's call it 1 gram per kilogram body mass. So if you're a 70 kilo person, that's around about 70 grams per day of protein is what you would need as an average standard non-competing athlete. But if we actually think about where the RDA comes from, this is what it is to be adequate to meet the needs of almost every person. Now there's a few things in there, but first of all is that term adequate. There's not many athletes I've worked with who strive for adequacy. You know, well, that might say the world's most adequate dad, which probably describes myself, given this is about the 4th weekend on the road that I've missed my little boy's football game. Not many athletes strive for that adequate intake. The other one is that practically all healthy people. And yes, an athlete would like to think is healthy, but as you heard from James, we're often dealing with genetic outliers, we're dealing with the freaks, and that is why they've got to this level of being elite. So I don't think the RDA for the general public should be anywhere near used what we're talking about with athletes. So that's the first thing. Anyone who still tells you it's the same, I promise you it isn't. So what is the RDA for athletes? Well, this is something that we put together a few years ago, and again, this is maybe me overcomplicating the story. Certainly what we now believe is this bottom end, the 0.8 grams per kilogram, it is too low. We work our way up into that green zone, that's probably where we need to be, somewhere between the 1.2 and the 2 grams per kilogram body mass per day. Now suddenly the 2 grams per kilogram body mass becomes a different story, because if we think about a 100 kilo rugby player needing 2 grams per kilogram body mass per day, that's around about 200 grams, which is around about the equivalent of 7 large chicken breasts. So in that situation, you can see where maybe a supplement may be useful. But if we think about some of the footballers that I work with, who may be striving at the 1.5 to 2 mark, 70 kilos, we can quite easily achieve that in a normal diet. So what's happened recently as well is there has been, because of the marketing, we see things like this, and if I had an American accent, I'd say this in an American accent. It sounds like an American thing, doesn't it? Come on in, dude. Can I get you anything? A protein drink, a protein bar, a protein cookie, some protein chips, some protein pasta. It appears these days that all we need to do to make a healthy food, an unhealthy food healthy, is add a little bit of protein powder to it. So we'll see things like a protein chocolate bar, or we'll see a packet of crisps that's had protein added. Please forgive my crudeness, but I use this a lot. A turd with 10 grams of protein in it is still a turd. It's just now got 10 grams of protein in it. So if you go into a shop and you've got the health food section, just because protein's added to it doesn't now mean that's a healthy food. And that's another take-home message for you. Just because something's marketed as, wow, this is a protein food, probability is it's still full of sugar, rubbish, things that you really don't want to be eating. But why is protein so important? And we think about protein for muscle growth. Anyone who studies in our group will have used this book, the Biochemistry Primer, really nice textbook. And one of the opening quotes is this: that everything we do, everything we are, everything we become depends on the actions of thousands of different proteins. And we've got to think about proteins that they're not only there for building muscle, but proteins are the enzymes that James was talking about before. The immune system is dependent on proteins. So pretty much everything we do is really important, and the protein intake therefore has to be spot on. So we want our athletes to adapt, we want them to get more mitochondria, to become more aerobically fit, we want them to get bigger and stronger, we want their immune system to be healthy. Getting the protein intake right is absolutely paramount. And that isn't just the key thing for the elite athletes, that's for the developing athlete, that's for the children at school, that's for the older athlete. All these people too need to get the protein intake right. This is my one science slide, so please forgive me, but it is quite important. Because the thing with protein, where it's a little bit different to some of the other nutrients, is that the storage capacity just isn't really there. So what we do is we eat our food, and obviously we digest and we absorb it, and then the amino acids, so the building blocks of proteins, end up in what we call this free amino acid pool. Now the free amino acid pool will contribute amino acids to build more muscle, but importantly, amino acids from the muscle being broken down to come back into this pool, and this is how we remove damaged proteins. So this is constantly going on. Some of the amino acids will go off to the liver, where it goes through what we call transamination and deamination, where it's converted to urea and excreted as urine. But the key thing is if we're not getting a ready supply of amino acids into this free amino acid pool, what we'll find is that the breakdown of proteins becomes more than them going into the muscle. So actually we get a net negative balance, and eventually over a period of time that was when we would see a decrease in muscle size. Where actually the free amino acid pool is where we want it to be, plenty of building blocks, and we give the right training stimulus, we've then got more coming in here and we're going to get a growth of muscle. And the way I often think about it is it's a bit like your muscles Lego, and these are your individual Lego pieces, and if we want to make this bigger we need some more Lego pieces to add here, and if this isn't very good we'll break it down, we'll break our Lego down and we'll start again and we'll rebuild it. And that's constantly going on as we speak, it's happening now. One of the best scientists in this field, a guy called Luc Van Luc, will always say look at your arm If you look at your arm, say goodbye to it, because in 3 months' time, there's pretty much not much of them proteins will still be there. They'll have all been turned over, recycled and come again. So that's constantly happening. And then if we think about, this is muscle protein synthesis, so growing of muscle. And this is what happens throughout the day. It's cyclical. It comes up and it comes down. And the only thing that makes it go up is protein. So if you wake up in the morning and you wait till around about here to have your first feed, most of the day you're actually below this line, so you're removing proteins from the muscle. You've not got an ability to build it. Where if we have regular feeds throughout the day, we've got more of these green zones where we can gain muscle and less of these red zones where we're losing muscle. And then we start thinking about that in the context of our working day. We think about even like the developing young player who's maybe going off to school, who in the morning wakes up, piece of toast, if you're lucky, out they go, and the first real food might come at 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock. So it's a really important first message there, is that we need to actually get the food regularly throughout the day and consistently. And the other worry I have with a young athlete is that we might have our lunch at around about 12 o'clock, then we might go to training at 4, 5, 6 p.m, get home by about 8, and we've had an 8-hour then gap in our day where food hasn't come. And then we think about these green zones. At this point we would be down here, and if no food was coming till late, we're in a period here where we've not got that ability to repair the muscle and have them adaptations that we're striving to achieve. So these messages aren't only important for the elite, a bit different to what we've maybe heard from James. These messages are translational all the way through, from the very youngest of the athletes all the way through to our senior guys that we work with. Okay, so I think it's really important to think about what happens. So this synthesis and breakdown is that cyclical thing that I just showed you about. So what you want to think about now is what happens following exercise. So what we've got in the blue bars here is protein synthesis, this is breakdown, and this is net balance. So when you go to the gym and train, fasted, so you've got no protein in you, the net effect is we're negative. And I think about my days as a rugby player where we had to be in the gym at 6 a.m. and after a full season I'd not gained any muscle, and actually I was worse than when I started. And that's because I was training at 6 a.m. fasted, because I didn't want to get up at 5 a.m. to have breakfast. And then I was going to bed for a couple of hours before my second session. So this is what happens this is in the resting state. So you would think when we had exercise, it would change, but we don't. Exercise on its own isn't a stimulus to gain muscle mass. There's another take-home message for you. Exercise without food will not gain you muscle mass. The key then comes to the protein feeding. So just giving the body a training stimulus won't get the effect you want. And James opened his talk this morning talking about how we believe often that nutrition can be more important than the training. Certainly they go hand in hand, and you get one right and one wrong, you're not going to get the maximum benefit from what you're trying to achieve. So that same study again that I showed before, where we've got synthesis, breakdown, net balance. Kevin Tipton came along, the first one to show it. Now what happens when we give protein? Suddenly we're getting positive. We've got the training stimulus. Now when we've got a protein intake, we can see the synthesis goes high and we're getting this positive state. But a really interesting question was then asked, does it have to be protein? So we've got the same scenario again, where we've got synthesis, breakdown, net balance. And in this study what they did was give carbohydrate. And you can see giving just a carbohydrate, you don't reverse that situation. Think about our breakfast in the morning. Think about, are we getting any protein? Are we getting any eggs or fish or milk into it at that point in the morning? If not, we might go and train, and this is where we are. And it's only now when protein's provided we get this big increase in muscle protein synthesis to get us in the positive state. The next question then is, does it have to be a supplement? So does that mean we have to have a protein shake first thing in the morning? And a lot of people would say, yeah, the supplements are important. But then people ignore this paper. And Bob Wolfe shouldn't be ignored. Bob Wolfe is like the guy who trained all the major leaders in sports protein synthesis now. Is there a maximum anabolic response to protein intake with a meal? And the argument here is that it isn't. where when we take it in a drink, maybe there is a maximal anabolic response, but certainly when it comes to food, we might be able to tolerate that a little bit more. So you can actually make an argument, but not only is a supplement not essential, but in some situations, food is probably a much better consequence, or a much better way to do it. Again, think about our breakfast. Are we getting protein in the morning? Most of us aren't, and that's a huge mistake I see made by many athletes. So let me give you a simple rule, and I'll use my daughter Phoebe to help us here.
Tell Danny what you'd like, please.
I want something with protein in. Please. Bye-bye.
So I'm on the road a lot, and I love that video because my wife sent it to me. And she'd asked Phoebe, what do you want for breakfast? And she wants something with protein in. So she's obviously listened to me, not none of my kids listen to me, but on this occasion she has listened to me, and she's right, even at that age. And if we think about, you know, growing children and milk and things like that, it becomes quite obvious, but suddenly we get to a point where we start allowing them not to have protein in the morning, which for me is a massive mistake. So we keep it simple, and these are the type of posters that we put up. This is one from Widnes Vikings, reminding them of have you had the protein this morning. We give them little reminders throughout the day, and you can see it's a food first approach. We do challenges, different ways to have your eggs, or different fish that you can have in the morning, and we make it a really big important part of our training day. And the teams where I get more control with, I think it's that important, the morning protein feed, but we try and make breakfast compulsory. So I've just started working with Everton Football Club, and that is one of the rules that we have there, that breakfast is compulsory, so we can actually make sure that we're getting the day off to a good start. Okay, so the first thing is I think we all agree that it's really important for a variety of things, and we need it regular. The next question is, how much do we actually need? And what I'm talking now is per meal. Now, a lot of people might have heard people say that 20 grams is a maximum you can tolerate in any one meal. And that comes from this study back in 2009 from Stu Phillips' lab. And this is because what we did here was give 0, 5, 10, 20 or 40. And we could see that there was no major difference between the 20 and the 40. And that's where it all came from. But what we weren't asking at that point is 20 grams enough for everyone? Because when we do a lot of these traditional studies that you see in the literature, what we tend to do is grab our students, pull them into the lab and use them as our subjects, because it's very hard to get people like this to come in and donate the biopsies. So nearly all the literature is biased to 70 to 80 kilo male 18 to 21-year-olds. And then too many people have tried to translate that all the way through to the elite end, which we shouldn't do. And it was as recent as 2014 that Stu Phillips then went through all his data to reanalyse it. And a lot of people don't see this because it's published in the Journal of Gerontology. So he published this in very much thinking about what the elderly need. But whenever you do an elderly study, you've also got a young people control group. And what you can now see is now there actually does appear to be, up to a point, protein intakes that should be in grams per kilogram body weight. And it looks around about 0.3 grams per kilogram per meal. So now this suggests if you're 100 kilos, it's around about 30 grams per meal. Let's put that now back into some context. A lot of protein shakes are 20 grams. A chicken breast is 30, a tin of tuna is 30, a steak is maybe 35 to 40. So again, we're getting an advantage over food rather than a supplement. So we can see that again, if we get our diet right, we'll probably do more good than thinking we can sort all this out in a powder. But the story goes even further, because the other thing that we often do when we do these type of studies, similar to what James showed you, we do one-legged exercise. So you're doing one-legged exercise, you can biopsy that leg, you can biopsy a non-exercise control leg, so you can look what's going on. Kevin Tipton's just come along now, and again using a bit of a student population. He looked at the difference between 20 and 40 grams when you did whole body exercise. So instead of doing one-legged, doing squats and deadlifts. And this showed that you needed approximately double, more like 40 grams of protein. Let's now get this into some context. So the 20 grams now doesn't appear right. It appears that it's more like 40 grams. if we get the big units who are doing whole body exercise, that 40 could be as high as 50 or 60. So how much do we really need? I don't think us scientists know. A few years ago we were quite confident it was 20 grams. When you speak with people who's been in the bodybuilding world and that, and they'll tell you that 20 grams is nowhere near enough. And that's another example of sometimes where practice is ahead of science. And sometimes us scientists have to catch up the practitioners. So bringing it back down, this is why I focus on food, because often if I give my rugby players a shake, they'll have 20 grams. If I tell them to have a feed, they might have 2 chicken breasts, where they get 60 grams. So post-training, I have a big push to actually get them to have it in the form of food. I touched on this a little bit earlier, but I just want to show you the research that goes with it, which is, if we think about most people's day, they have very little protein at breakfast. They might have a rubbish sandwich at dinner that has a tiny bit of protein, and most of the protein then comes at the end of the day. And I'm sure a lot of people, if you think about your day, it comes like that. The first real bits of meat and fish tend to come at 5 or 6 p.m. So they did a study to look at, it was John Hawley's group, whether you give it in a bolus form, intermittently, so regularly like I've been suggesting, or tiny little bits every hour. Let's say every 1.5 hours. And what we saw is that giving it every 3 hours appears to be the way forward. So now the picture's developing a little bit further. We need it in the morning. We're thinking it's more than 20 or 30 grams. It's probably nearer to 40 for an adult. 20 grams is probably right for the developing athlete. And we need it spread evenly about every 3 hours. As I said, this story is now becoming quite simple. The supplement world make us answer this question, which is better, but you know, because you'll go into a supplement shop and you might see soy, whey, or casein. And again, this research has been done very well by the likes of Stu, where you can see that when it comes in its supplement form, it does appear that whey protein is a better option over the casein and the soy protein, which is probably to do with the rate that it releases its amino acids. So post-training, we want rapidly digested proteins. So the whey protein can be quite useful post-training because of the speed that it releases its amino acids. There's been a recent push about the amino acid leucine. So people thinking we can just take leucine. And Stu Phillips looked at this again, looking at what happens if we supplement with just leucine. And what you see here is that in the immediate post-exercise window, giving leucine or whey protein were both equally effective, but wait 3 to 5 hours later and the whey protein is better than just the leucine. So what this suggests is that leucine is what switches on the signal. So providing our food is rich in leucine and it's rapidly digested, then we're fine. We don't need to be adding additional leucine. So again, we don't need to be rushing out buying a leucine supplement. It comes all the way back to, you know, a lot of the foods that we eat will be rich in leucine, and if we go for a standard whey protein, again, that's going to be rich in leucine and it's rapidly digested. So don't believe the marketing again that leucine is like this massively important thing that we also must be supplementing. Again, it's just overcomplicating the story. A lot of people ask me pre or post training. So if we're going to do resistance training, should we take our protein before or after? And there's a nice quote from this paper showing that the studies of post-exercise protein are unequivocal. So if you take protein post-exercise, you always get a benefit. We're taking pre, it's equivocal. I think we argue about that too much. I think we do it both. And if we think about it in the morning, let's get up, let's have some breakfast with some protein in it. If we're going to then train, then we have it after. And likewise, if you was going to do your training session at around about 6 p.m, I would still be recommending some protein around about 5ish, and then immediately after as well. So I think this is another one that we've overcomplicated, and the simple, you know, we might spend a lot of time arguing, is it slightly better before or after, where in reality, we want it regularly throughout the day, so take it before and after. This one makes me laugh a lot, because especially if you go into commercial gyms, you'll see the people who will finish the last set and it's a sprint to the changing rooms to get the protein, because if you don't get it in within the first minute, you've wasted your time doing that session. You know, or you might hear people saying that you need to take it between each set. You know, let's keep sipping it between each set because we've got this window, and if we miss the window, it's disastrous. Well, let's look at the evidence, and it comes from this study, a lot of it, so Blake Rasmussen, and you can see that if you give protein immediately post-exercise, we get this big increase, and it drops again. So maybe we're onto something. We failed to mention there was a second part to the study, where we actually waited 3 to 4 hours and give a feed, and you get that exact same response. Now, what I'm not saying is wait 3 to 4 hours, but what I am saying is that you don't need to sprint to the changing rooms. And if you live close to your gym and you can go home and have a feed, go home and have your feed. It's probably better. You'll get more protein, you'll get lots of things out of it. If you're not going to be able to get home and eat within, say, an hour or two, well, maybe have a shake to turn that signal on. So we put that leucine in to turn that signal on, and then we go and eat a little bit later. But don't think you've wasted your training session. This has been dragged out as far as 24 hours. But when you give that muscle a stimulus, it's waiting to see these amino acids to grow. And it makes sense if we think about it, because if we think about hunter-gatherers and things like that, you know, they weren't doing the training and then being able to immediately feed. We had to go and catch our animal, kill it, cook it, do what we're going to do to it, and then eat it. And we would never have evolved to have a system where we've wasted all our time, that if we don't eat the second we've done the training, we've wasted that session. So it just makes no sense. And the reason it makes no sense is that it's been over-marketed, because the best way to sell a supplement is to say you must have it post-training, because most people don't want to take a chicken dinner to the gym. So that's all it's come from. So what do we do with England, with an England rugby? Well, yes, we do have shakes available post-training, but they're not compulsory, because the guys can go and have a feed. We have things like biltong, we do have food out, we have bars out with nuts, seeds, granola, things like that. So they can get something immediately, but we do encourage them to go and have a feed. And we split our players into what we call maximisers, maintainers or minimisers, depending on the body comp goal. And you can see that the post-training snack, these are the snacks by the way, you know, ribeye steak is a snack. You are dealing with a very different animal to what James has just talked about. But the maximisers will have the protein, we'll have some carbs, like some wraps, and we'll add some healthy fats to try and get the calories up. Our maintainers will just go with a little bit, and you can see, similar to what James was saying, our minimisers, these are ones who will get to do our second session low carb, to do what everything James just talked about, and they'll just have the meat and salad. So they're not fasted, to answer the question that somebody asked before, but we put a protein feed in and we'll do the second session in that lower carb state to drive them adaptations. So similar message, different sport. So what about post-game when it comes to protein? So this is something our group's really interested in, and when we don't know the answer to a question, out come our needles again. This time we did a simulated game where we was feeding our players protein and carbohydrate after the training session, and we got them to the simulated game. So we used a simulated game this time to make sure that everyone did the exact same amount of running, to make sure we get the distance right. And the really cool thing about this study, this was actually one of Angela's MSc classmates, their dissertation. So this was one of our master's dissertations. So we try and make our projects answer questions that we really don't know the answer to. And what we realised then is that yes, we do, from both a carbohydrate and a protein perspective, we do want to feed both post-game. So now this is Twickenham changing rooms after a typical international, and you'll see we have things like chicken skewers out, we have meatballs, some pizza for the carbohydrate, we have potato wedges, some dips, some prawns. Again, you can see where I go for a food first approach. So it would be quite easy to just put a shake in, and some players do like that because it's convenient. But players who like to eat, I'll put the food in. Need carbs with the post-exercise protein? That's a common question because we hear about needing this insulin spike. Again, over-marketed, because what we don't tell you is that both whey protein and hydrolyzed casein, for that matter, they both cause an insulin spike anyway. So everyone who believes it's insulin that makes you fat, you know, people hear about the insulin theory, and that's why everyone promotes low-carb diets, but what we don't tell you is that plasma insulin spikes in response to whey protein as well. So more evidence that that story isn't actually true. But no, we don't have to put carbohydrate in there to get the insulin response. So if you don't need it, like our minimizers wouldn't, well then I don't. I just give a straight protein post-training. Okay, so far what we've hopefully realised is it's quite simple. It's food, it's going regular, it's good amounts, and it's before and after training are quite important. Overnight recovery is one, but we've heard this story for a long time now, but it's only recently it's been investigated. And people have talked about casein being a good thing to have before bed, because with whey protein what you get is a spike, and then it drops again by around about 3 hours. This is the anabolic drive from a whey protein, or a casein, because it curdles in the stomach and it's slow to release. You get this not as big, but a more sustained drive. So the suggestion is that casein before bed would be a good thing. I'm going to throw my non-supplement card again, so you're all going to get fed up of me talking this way, I'm sure of it. But cottage cheese is packed full of casein. Milk is 80% casein, 20% whey. So I don't know about you, but when I was growing up, my mum used to always say have a glass of milk before bed. And we all believe that mums know nothing, but actually, when we look back now, mums actually do know best. Because a glass of milk before bed would be, in this scenario, would be very similar to what we're talking about. And believe it or not, it was only actually in 2012 that this study was done. People have talked about this for years, but the study was only done in 2012, and it was a really clever study where what Luke manages to do is infuse food overnight. So you can actually then take biopsies, wake them up in the night to take the biopsies, and some really cool studies. So they can look at breakdown, synthesis and net balance when they haven't had a casein. This was a drink in this study, but they've not had casein pre-bed. All the rest of the day was controlled, but this one would give casein pre-bed. Well, now what we see is this is the overnight muscle protein breakdown and synthesis, and you can see that overnight it's much bigger when casein has been given pre-bed. So you wake up in the morning, instead of waking up in a negative state, we wake up in a positive state. So, and a simple message there is that even in youngsters, if they're training hard, something like a glass of milk pre-bed might actually be a good thing, especially if we've not hit our protein targets throughout the day. And it certainly we do at the senior end. This is one example where we do use a shake. We use a casein shake just because for convenience, but we can quite simply change out for real food, and some players do prefer to eat real food. I don't think we're quite at this stage yet where we've got to infuse it all night, but in principle that is what the idea that casein is doing. It's a trickle feed of it all night. Okay, so you've heard me mention this value 2 grams per kilogram body mass, and that's generally what I aim at, just because it's going to be fine. If there is any excess, it's not going to be harmful. We'll just end up breaking it down to urea and excreting it. So it's probably been on the safe side of that 2 grams per kilogram body mass. But at the times that we need more protein, and this is a really neat study by Kevin Tipton and his group. And actually the mid-author is a guy called Nigel Mitchell, who used to work with Team Sky before James. And this came from an observation that when they had athletes going through weight loss, if they cranked up the protein really high, Nigel suspected that they didn't lose any muscle. So he approached Kevin Tipton to say, can we test that hypothesis? So what we've got in the control is where we drop the energy from around about 14.4 megajoules to 8.5, and similar here in both groups. In this one, the energy was just cut across the board, so you can see protein, carbs and fats all dropped. In this one, what we did was we dropped the energy from carbohydrate and fat, and we cranked up the protein to 2.3 grams per kilogram body mass. So putting people through a weight loss diet, but cranking up the protein to 2.3. And what we see here is, this is the group that was a control, and this was a high protein. So at first you could think, well, the control actually lost more weight, so maybe the high protein wasn't a good thing. But when we look at the fat mass was identical in the two groups, and the difference being, in the group where they didn't ramp up the protein, these guys also lost around about 2 kilograms of muscle mass. So when we're putting our athletes on a low-calorie diet to try and get body fat down, we do ramp protein up to around about 2.3 to 2.5 grams per kilogram body mass. The rest of the time we keep it about the 2 grams mark. And I don't know if anyone saw this article. It was a lot of newspapers recently talking about the holy grail of diet and exercise, scientists showing the best way that you can actually lose fat and gain muscle at the same time. And I'm not going to bore you with the paper, but this is the paper, and they saw a reasonable loss of body fat. So you can see pre to post in kilos from around about 100 to 94 kgs in the protein and the control. So this saw a good decrease in body fat. Look, we can beat that because this is within England Rugby, and we use a mobile DEXA scanner to scan our athletes. And I'm just going to show you, this is the scans from one of our players building up to a World Cup between June and August, where this player actually put on from 97 to 102 kilograms, and at the same time his fat mass dropped from 22.5 to 14, which in percentage wise it's around about 18% body fat, dropping it down to about 12% body fat, at the same time as putting on around about 5 kilos of muscle mass. So I think we'd all agree that's quite an impressive. And that's using exactly the science that you've heard from James and myself. The carbohydrate was periodised around training. We fueled the hard sessions, we underfueled the others. When you had double sessions, we fueled it with protein in between, and we ramped the protein right up to around about 2.5 grams. Now this isn't the player in question, but just a really interesting article that I saw on Planet Rugby talking about Billy V. And I love this quote here, but admitting that opting for a salad was his normal choice. He credited the support staff for being a massive help. Salad and veg are what I've been eating that I wouldn't normally. If you ever go to a Tongan dinner, you wouldn't see salad on the table. If it is there, it's the flowers decorating the table, which I thought was really good, because it was the hardest thing that what we had to do with Billy was, because if you're going to take that carbohydrate out, like James says, you're going to get hungry. And people talk about protein helping. I don't think it does. If I just eat protein foods, I get hungry. It's the salad and the vegetables that I think become really important. And I know this talk wasn't on it, but if there's any one take-home message I can give for the youngsters, it is the vegetables. We've got to get more veg into our youngsters. It's the biggest bane of my life, trying to get it into my 7-year-old. I've now started down the stealth vegetable route, where you're chopping carrots into chicken curries and putting cauliflower into mashed potatoes and all sorts. And it drives me insane, but there's another take home that is maybe for another day, the vegetable one. So, do we actually need supplements then, when it comes to protein? And I don't think it is probably as clear as we think. If you're going to eat 15% of your energy intake, this is typical energy intake of a rugby player, around about 3,000. That gives us around about 90 grams of protein. That clearly isn't enough. But that doesn't mean it's got to be a supplement. It means we need to make more of an effort to get protein foods in a standard diet. And the standard 15% of intake, which is recommended for the general public, will not work for most athletes. So it doesn't mean it has to be a supplement, but it can't be a conventional 15% protein diet. Let me begin to try and tie this all together. And I started off by saying, have we really overcomplicated the story? And then you get science geeks like myself in the lab thinking, do we need 1.6 or 1.8 grams to maximise fractional synthesis rate in my next experiment? And then I get people like Manu saying, shut up geek, what do I need to eat to be big and strong? And ultimately that's what it comes down to, what do you need to eat to be big and strong? At England Rugby, what we then try and do is develop educational message to try and encourage players to be aware, and we use our players to show that. And this is I'm just going to show a little clip, and if you want to see more of things like this, we've recently done a website for England Rugby called foodforrugby.org, and a lot of the messages on there, it's aimed at the developing player, so like the 16-year-old, and a lot of the messages aren't just there for rugby, they're translatable to a variety of sports. But we have little video clips like this on it. At England Rugby, we're a massive believer that we get the science right, and that actually our nutrition programmes are research informed and evidence based, and then we can transfer that lab based science into food, into match day performance.
So many people embark on any form of training or sport, and they don't quite get the nutrition right, and they wonder why they don't get the recovery, why they're feeling tired, why they don't get the gains they want. And you know, nutrition for us as rugby players is huge. You know, we're not cover models, we never will be. You know, we're performance athletes. You have to fuel your body, and you have to look at food first. You know, if you want to put on size and want to get powerful and recover, you want to be eating 4 to 5 times a day, lots of veg, lots of natural foods and lots of whole food.
The diet's based around high quality proteins such as the chicken that we see here, eggs and fish such as the salmon, and we try and make sure that the players get high quality protein regularly throughout the day. On top of that, we focus a lot of the diet around vegetable produce, and then we give them high quality carbohydrates as well, such as the sweet potato that you can see here, rice, quinoa, and other varieties. And with the carbohydrate, that's very much balanced towards the individual needs. We very much believe in educating the players, giving them personal diet coaches to make sure that they know exactly what they're putting into the body, but more importantly why. If the players understand why they're doing something, they're more likely to be making better choices. Not only here we're in camp, but when we're away from camp, then they've also got the skills needed to make good decisions.
If you're looking to perform, you need to fuel your training. Carbohydrates are not the enemy, you need to have that. You know, trying to stay away from refined things, you know, like white bread, like white rice, white pasta, those kind of things. You know, try and stay away from ready meals, junk food, all that kind of stuff's a huge thing. And just keep it very simple and just, you know, build up. Don't try and change everything in one go. Start with having a good breakfast. You need to make sure you have a protein source of breakfast, you know, porridge if you need to. And, you know, they always say eat your veg if you want to be big and strong, and it's true.
When the players come into camp, there's a large amount of food available. It's all great food that the chefs are producing, but you need to get it in the right amounts. If you're having too much good food in the wrong amount, then you can still gain body fat and be in the wrong shape. So that education is essential.
If we get the food right, we can get them extra percentages out of you. We're very much focused on a food first approach, so make sure that they're eating high quality produce. If you're wondering about where do you spend them extra few pounds, I would always say spend it on quality produce. Try and eat fresh, try and find really good quality sources of protein. When it comes to the vegetables, believe it or not, this is a huge part of a rugby player's diet. I thought it was all about the meat and the carbohydrates, but the vegetables are really important. And don't be scared of healthy fats. That's something that we've maybe not mentioned so far, but fats are a really important food, found in things like the oily fish, nuts, avocado. And a rule of thumb is just, if it's fresh, if it's natural food, the probability is it's going to be a great choice for the rugby player.
We're very much about a food first approach. Supplements are what they are, they're to supplement a diet. Get your diet right first. You know, use that food first philosophy, let the pros use. Get good quality food in your diet. That will help you hit all your performance goals that you need to. Whether it's getting in shape, you can do that through natural food. Energy levels, you can do that through real food. If there is a case where there is a particular need to use a supplement, then get advice from a suitable, qualified practitioner who can advise properly on what requirements you have.
I would say to anyone, any kid, everything, any parent, diet is the first place to look. That's the place you're going to get the best results. It's the place that you're going to, you know, really see a difference. It's very easy, as you would expect it. If you look at your plate like a pie chart, real good portion of protein, real good portion of carbohydrates, really good portion of vegetables. You'll be sweet.
So what I really like about the video is that you hear the messages that we're trying to educate the likes of myself and Mike with England Rugby by somebody as experienced as James Haskell, talking about food first, talking about a good protein source at breakfast, talking about eat your veggies. So it's great that we're actually getting that message across to our athletes. We try and simplify everything, and you can see this is a poster that we've recently done for the England Rugby under-20s team. We're talking about how can they get the right protein throughout the day, and you can see we're looking at things like the yogurts, biltong, chocolate milk, eggs, chicken, tuna, and we're just showing how can we get 30 grams throughout the day. And you see even James with Team Sky takes it down to this level where he's looking at the protein intake throughout the day as well. So we try and simplify it. We spend a lot of time educating our players what does 30 grams of protein look like, and you can see we show them how it's eggs, chicken, beef, salmon, the yogurts, the cottage cheese, sorry, the beef jerky, etc. And we even then get them into the kitchen, and you can see this is some of our senior players. There's Goody, I think Jeff Cruz on the other one. You can see we spend a lot of time trying to educate, show them how to do it, and make sure that they've got the ability to cook the food. So these are actually meals that the England guys cook for us, so we can test if they've got the ability to cook great food. And that's one of the first things we do with youngsters, is actually get them in the kitchen to show them that you don't have to eat ready meals. It's so easy to make high quality protein-based foods. We spend a lot of time talking about quality. So I've talked a lot about protein, but for me, would you really want to be eating that? Maybe again it's maybe a bit crude, but that's what I want to eat. You know, I want to eat something that's, you know, been well looked after, been in the fields, but the animals eating the right foods, and it's high quality. And I find that what we often find is if we focus on quality over quantity, we do much better. This is a website that I mentioned, foodforrugby.org, and what's really, again, what I'm really proud about is that this website was pretty much put together from graduates of our MSc degree. So there's Andy Casper, who's now part of my nutrition team, who helps me with England under-20s, and he's a graduate of the MSc in sport nutrition at John Moores. And you can see things like that video that I just showed you. You can click on there and have a watch. But I didn't want to show that again. So it comes down to this. So all the science of all how much you should be eating comes down to this quote, which is one of the top professors in this field said that the key test of adequacy, are you having enough? So I started off talking about an adequate amount. The key test is, are you making long-term responses in what you're specifically interested in? So if you're doing all the right training and you're not gaining the muscle, you're not having an adequate intake of protein. It's as simple as that, and we can need to work on it. So the proof of the pudding, as we say, is in the taste. So I have a simple take-home message, and it's this, that protein's got to be regular. The regular consumption of protein is really essential for athletes. And I don't just mean the elite, I mean all athletes. Doesn't mean it's got to be a supplement. If we can get it in food, great. The biggest mistake I see with protein is people backloading the day. So getting it all in one hit at the end of the day, where we need it regular. This amount, around about 2 grams per kilogram body mass per day, is perhaps the best target, spreading evenly into 4 or 5 doses. The source may make a difference post-training, where the rapidly digested may be useful, but the key thing is that we're having it regular, high quality, and it's consistent. On that note, really thank you for coming, and I'd be delighted to take any questions. Okay, cheers. Do you know what? With England rugby, no, we don't. Surprisingly. I think with vegetarian athletes, it's not that difficult. We just need to get, protein balance it a bit better, because we know that like grains like lysine and pulses methionine. So as long as we're balancing our protein intake, I think that's quite easy. If we're happy to put milk and eggs and things like that in, then it becomes really easy, because they're really high quality bits of protein. The vegan athletes then becomes a little bit more tricky. I'm not saying it's impossible, but if I'm being honest, I would probably refer to somebody who had a lot more experience working with that than me. I've never yet worked with anyone who's vegan. So the kidney thing's not a new thing, it's been going around for years. Every bit of quality research that I've seen and that anyone's seen, Stu Phillips has wrote some wonderful papers on this, suggests that if you've got a normal functioning kidney, there is absolutely no dangers whatsoever of going at the type of levels that we're talking about. If you haven't, well then maybe there is a bit of an issue. We're in a good position, but we do check renal function. It's a little bit of a misnomer, and I'm not sure where the anecdotal reports are coming from, seeing more cases of kidney stones. You know, it's probably some of these spurious correlations, and we wonder what else is going on. But certainly at the levels we're talking about, but if anything, it's actually beneficial. So we don't worry about it in the slightest. You know, we've been in, well, rugby guys are probably up maybe higher than 2.5 to 3. and I've been working in this game for 15 years across pretty much every team in the Super League, and I've not seen one kidney stone in 15 years on over 5,000 athletes. So I personally don't see it as an issue. But it's a great question to ask, because a lot of people won't worry about that. So yeah, so most of the athletes I work with are 16 to 30, something like that. The young athletes, again, I wouldn't be going down the protein supplement, but I'm still convinced that if we want them to actually get the developments we need, they need to be having protein regularly throughout the day. And it's all in relation to their own body mass, isn't it? So they don't need as much as an adult, but they need a small amount regularly throughout the day. And if you think what we're doing now with young athletes, and I think swimming's a good example, we're training them like adults, but not feeding them like that way. We're expecting youngsters to do more and more training. At football clubs now, from the age of 12 or 13, they're full-time professionals. We ship them in every day to train from around about 1 PM onwards, and they do as much training as the senior guys. So they probably need just as much support, if not more, because they've got the growing issue of growth and development and bone formation and all the key things. So I still think that the advice I've been talking about today is really translatable to the young athlete too. But food. And what I try and get my youngsters to think about is, for me, then 2 key time points. The breakfast one, you know, like, let's just get up earlier, let's just have some scrambled eggs, you know, have some milk, do whatever at the morning. And then that key point where you finish school at about 3:30, you might go to training 4:35, you've not eaten anything, and then your next feed maybe 7 or 8 PM at night. So you've had an 8-hour window without any quality nutrition in you. So I try and encourage the youngsters that I work with to take a snack to school with them for that 3:30 PM time point. Okay, I'll touch on supplements in obviously the next talk. I use a few, but not many. Creatine is one on an individual basis, but I don't use it with youngsters. So don't ask me the age that I would use it, because it's a very individual question. Some 16-year-olds have got beards and the men. Some 16-year-olds are like 12-year-old boys, aren't they? So it's a very much individual basis. I'd like not to be using it with people at that age, but if you've got a 16-year-old playing first team rugby, and all the other people are taking it so they've got additional strength, am I actually doing him a disservice not allowing him to be as strong as the people who are bashing him? So we need to sometimes think like that. I was 17 when I made my Super League debut, up against some very, very big men. So creatine I do use. There's probably a handful, like beta-alanine, creatine, caffeine, vitamin D to correct a deficiency, fish oil, probiotics, and protein when it's needed. That's about it, really. The odd one may be to correct a deficiency. I guess it a bit depends what ability you've got to take things with you. You know, the humble chicken wrap can be a great one if it will keep till that time. Pots of Greek yogurt with mixed nuts and seeds would be another one, so you got your protein and some energy, things like that. If you come home, then it's a bit easier. You can have a feed, you know, knock up a quick omelette or something like that. But the yogurt, the pots of yogurt and the wraps are what we try and promote as much as we can. Yeah, and that is becoming more common. I'm getting. The first thing is to work out if it is, you know, a lot of people just remove it, dairy, because they've heard it's good for you to remove it, and I would like, if you're not dairy intolerant, I think there's so much goodness in there, I wouldn't. But you've just got to replace it with another high quality source of protein. So in a morning, for example, if you weren't going to have eggs, you might have some fish instead, you know, mackerel, a lot of people have them in a elite sense anyway. When it comes to the dairy, we can look at non-dairy alternates for the milks. You know, a few years ago you'd probably get shot down for saying this, but you know, soy milk, people, I don't think soy is anywhere near as bad as what people, particularly the bodybuilding world, try to make it out to be. about suddenly we'd all turn into females if we had soya because of the phytoestrogens in it. And again, not for me, but yeah, I'd look for a non-dairy alternate to milk, and I would look for another high quality protein source. Yeah, I've got 2 PhD students working on that at the moment, on gut health, partly because it's a massively emerging issue, and more of my practice is spent trying to help people with gut health. It's a huge one. We're at the moment working on 3 things: colostrum, glutamine and probiotics, and looking at how any of them can help. And then even, you probably, I don't know if you read about a FODMAP approach to people who's got on the IBS spectrum, so looking at the allergy or the food elimination diets, removing some of the fermentable oligosaccharides, disaccharides, monosaccharides and polyols, the FODMAP. So yeah, we're doing a lot on it. It's becoming a bigger problem. I still don't think we shouldn't rule out first line approach, which is, are people getting enough fibre, are they getting enough vegetables into them? I've got players saying to me, I've got gut problems, who couldn't spell vegetable, never mind eat one. You know, so let's start off at the most basic. Let's make sure that they've had a medical check to make sure there's nothing nasty there. We've ruled out celiac, we've ruled all that out. Then we'll look at first line advice, fibre and things like that. And then after all that, we can look that a little bit further at the things like glutamine. The glutamine's an interesting one because a lot of people promote it, but it only works if you take about 50 grams of the stuff. And 50 grams of glutamine is some serious going. There's a nice literature on colostrum, if bovine colostrum, if you've got issues about affecting leaky gut. And there's also a good literature on probiotics, particularly following like antibiotic issues, you know, to try and recolonise that gut bacteria. Not as strong as the literature of the digestive enzymes. And it's not somewhere I've needed to go down there yet, but if certainly someone's got a specific targeted problem, like a lactose problem, you might then look at helping out. But the more I look in this industry, the more I'm not afraid to refer. And if somebody's got a problem, I'll refer to a clinical dietitian or a gastrointestinal expert, rather than, we can't be experts at everything. But we're having a go. We're having a go.